So today we want to come together. I'm kind of jumping backwards. I'm kind of leapfrogging backwards over love, which we talked about love for Valentine's Day, and it's always appropriate that we must consider what divine love is. Not human love, not emotional love, not physical love, but divine love. What is the divine love? What is the devotion? What is this recognition of the presence of the divine within ourselves and within each other? That's the kind of love that I'm talking about. The love of unity, the love of oneness. That which we feel one with, we truly love. And as we discussed, for the purpose of expanding our soul, expanding our awareness of the presence of God, that is our spiritual growth. Love is an easy path, or the easiest path. I won't say it's always easy, but it's the easiest path. Because we can simply look at that which we love and ask ourselves, well, why do I love? Why do I love this person, this place, this thing? Is my love a divine love, or is my love a physical appetite? Like people say, oh, I love hamburgers. No, you don't. You like hamburgers, you want a hamburger, but you're not experiencing divine love with a hamburger. I doubt that anyway. Maybe it could happen. But before we got into love, and I don't want to belittle it, because love is so important. If you didn't do anything else but learn how to love your whole life, if you just threw everything else away and understood what Augustine meant when he said, finally there's only one commandment, love and do what you will. If we understand in the teachings from the New Testament, where the setting has the disciples asking Jesus, but which is the greatest commandment? And Jesus' response was, there's only two. There's only two. And what you want to do is love God with your whole heart and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. Okay? And that, by the way, that thought, that ideological thought, that existed in Judaism at the time. Rabbi Hillel, which if you drive around the universities in America, you see the Hillel Society, which is a group for Jewish students. So these ideas, they kind of permeate this idea of love. And now we want to go back to kind of picking up where we left off in January. Remember in January we went back to the basics. We talked about the thing itself, the way it works, what it does, and how to use it. And the last Sunday, we talked about the call to action. That Dr. Holmes told us that the great difficulty in the new order of thought would be that we would talk about it too much and use it too little. Because it's in using, it's in applying, it's in trying that we actually find out what we do know and what we don't know, and we get the feedback that we need in order to grow more. And by growth I mean expanding our awareness of the presence and the activity of the divine right here and right now. That's what I'm talking about by growth. So a couple things I want to talk about. We're going to talk today, the way Dr. Holmes has laid out the textbook. He starts off with those introductory chapters, and then he goes through a section where he talks kind of about our relationship with God, and he really starts to expand on the idea, what do we believe about God? What do we know about God? How does God work? How does God create? How does this entity that doesn't have arms and legs and hands and feet, how does it create universes out of itself? What do we understand about that? What do world religions and philosophies teach us about that? What do we believe about that? He really takes us through deepening our idea of what God is. And you want to keep in mind when we get to treatment, what is the first step in treatment? The first step, we use a 5-step process. And the first step is what do we know about God? What do we know about God? And he starts the textbook off the same way. What do we know about God? What do we know about how God creates? And then he brings us into our unification with that. Because we are created out of that, because we have been created by this divine love out of itself. What is true of the divine is true of us. Not that we are the divine or that we're ever going to be all that God is, but everything that we are is some part of the divine, like the wave is some part of the ocean. And what he's bringing us to then is this intellectual understanding that because divine thought is creative, right? The divine creates through an act of will and an act of volition. This is demonstrated to us in the book of Genesis by Spirit saying, "Let there be." A deliberate act. And if you look at the creation mythology of different religions and different philosophies around the world, many of them have creation as being a deliberate act of some sort of creator. Now we can disagree on what that creator might be. The exact manner in which the creator creates might be different from culture to culture. But the idea is pretty much the same. Creation is a deliberate act. A deliberate act. Because we are created in the image and likeness of the ultimate creator, we must come to a realization then that our thoughts have power. Not that we put the power into them, but they have power in that they direct this law of mind, as we call it, that responds to thought. So when the divine said, "Let there be," something responded to that command, "Let it be," and something made it so. Something that was extremely intelligent, knew exactly what to do, when to do it, how to do it. You can think of, or the way I think of the process of evolution as from the instant the planets came to be, even before then, everything was lining itself up perfectly. Everything was lining itself up perfectly for the evolution of this life form, this human life form, which became self-aware, became self-conscious, has the ability to inquire, to ask, how do we know what we know, has the ability to recognize what we are thinking. Now it's evident if that in any species of animals, there's something going on. There's a thought process going on in there. We can train them. I watched the first Harry Potter movie for the first time a couple of weeks ago. One of my grandchildren got me the DVD series for Christmas, and they were in the bonus features. They were talking about how an animal trainer came in and trained the owls to actually deliver the mail. If you've seen Harry Potter, there's a scene where there's like 400 children in this giant room, this giant mess hall, and they're eating, and the owls start coming in and dropping mail pouches down, the right mail package delivered to the right student. And most of the owls were computer generated, but some of them were in fact real owls. They were trained. My point is that they can be trained, they can learn, but we don't know whether or not they are aware of their thinking. They think, but they may not be aware of their thinking. But you and I can become aware of our thinking. Remember that, can become aware of our thinking. We're not always aware of what we are thinking, and we're certainly not aware of what we are thinking at what's called the subconscious level or the subjective level. But nevertheless, there is this power in the universe that responds to our belief, whether we are aware of what we believe or not, or whether we consciously choose what we believe or not. So Dr. Holmes then is bringing us up to this idea where in the next section of the textbook, he's talking about the basics or the basis or both of spiritual mind healing. How is it that we can experience a healing in some circumstances or conditions in our lives? And the how of it is because there's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief, that which we call the physical, the matter, is responsive to that which we call the mental or the thought. So just as in the beginning God said, "Let there be," and something happened and a universe came into being, Matter was responsive to that thought. The law is responsive to the thought. The law then acts upon the matter. He says, think of your thought like setting up a field of vibrations, is the way he describes it. And I know other teachers just kind of describe it the same way to talk about this idea of vibrating, but an attunement. Rocco Errico says that the Aramaic word for prayer was an attunement. That when we are praying, we are attuning our minds to the mind of God, or the mind of love, or the mind of the divine, whatever words feel good to you. Right, so we are attuning. And you remember the Ray Stevens song, "Turn Your Radio On." There's music in the air. There's stuff going on. There's stuff going on, and are we attuned to it? And what we attune ourselves to, that we become aware of, just at a psychological level, we become aware of it. If for example, you're interested in airplanes, you'll suddenly notice more airplanes than you had previously noticed, because you're interested in them. Nothing magical about that. It's just they're on your mind, and now you're aware of things. If I asked you tomorrow when you go to work, if I sow to seed, this is how people manipulate your thoughts. By the way, if I sow to seed and said, there's more red cars than ever on the road, just more. I don't know what it is, but there's more red cars than ever on the road. If you accepted that idea and started paying attention to red cars tomorrow, you would see more red cars than you normally see. Not that there's more red cars there than there ever was before, but you're attuned to them. You're attuned to them. So what we're doing is we are attuning our thoughts. We are when we are thinking, which is always, we are creating a mental atmosphere about us. This is kind of the aura that psychics might see. Dr. Holmes said that frequently when he was speaking, people would come up afterwards and tell him that they saw a portrait of Emerson in his aura. And Dr. Holmes said, there's absolutely no wonder that they saw that, because Emerson had such a great influence on his thoughts and his life. We have to think of ourselves as a mental atmosphere, perhaps is the best way to put it. We are this conglomeration of everything that we have thought, we have experienced, we believe. It's all there at the conscious level and the subconscious level. I want you to think of one of the teachings of Buddhism. It says everything we experience is because of our thoughts, beliefs, and our emotions. And the pain and suffering in our life is the result of our erroneous thoughts, beliefs, and emotions. And if we wish to have different experience, we need to stop having erroneous thoughts, beliefs, and emotions. And then we need to eliminate the causes or the origins of those thoughts, beliefs, and emotions. Those are the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. Of course, I've Americanized them, but those are essentially the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. Pain and suffering exist. They exist because they are a result of our erroneous thoughts, beliefs, and emotions. So the same idea there is in Buddhism, that if we change our thinking, we change our life. Our thought is directive. Our thought is creative. We don't have to scrunch up our eyes and put a lot of power into our thought, but our thought is creative. If I decide that I want to have the light on in the room, I go over to the wall and I flip the switch and the light comes on. Now, it doesn't really take a lot of effort for me to do that, and it's designed that way. I mean, light switches are made easily to move, made to be easy to move for that reason. Right? They're placed at a convenient height. They're pretty much standard in every room that we go into. They're pretty much located in the same proximity to a door when we go into a room. And the idea is we don't have to make it hard. We don't have to scrunch up our eyes. We don't have to kneel down. We don't have to light a candle or incense in order to get the electricity to cooperate with us. We simply cooperate with electricity the way it works. We flip that switch. So where we're going with this, he starts off by talking about the first thing that we have to grasp is that our thought is creative. Our thought is creative. If we don't get that, if we don't believe that, if we don't understand that, then further study is of no avail, right? Because we've missed the very fundamental, the fundamental building block of the whole teaching. that there is a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. We see it, as I said, in Buddhism. Buddhism says everything you experience is a result of what you have thought. We see it in the Old Testament, in Proverbs, I believe. It says everything, it says as you think and believe in your heart, so are you. I think it's Proverbs 23:7. We see it in the New Testament, and it can kind of be summarized in the teachings of Jesus. It's done unto you according to your belief. You remember, for those of you who are familiar with the New Testament, you may remember there's a parable of the centurion who had a sick servant, and the centurion came to Jesus and he said to Jesus, "My servant is sick. Would you heal my servant?" And Jesus said to him, "Yes, let's go." And the servant said, "No, no, no." I mean the centurion, right? Centurion's a soldier, and soldiers understand command and control. And the centurion, "I understand how power works. You don't need to go. You just have to say your word, and it'll be taken care of. So save your time, save your money. Don't bother coming with me. That's not necessary. Just say the word." And in the New Testament, in the story in the New Testament, Jesus tells the man that it's done. It's done according to the man's faith. And then he turns to the disciples and he says, "I haven't found anybody with faith like this ever. This man has it. This man believes it." So this man understood that there's a power of thought, and he understood how it works, and he had faith in it. He believed in it. So the first thing we have to do is ask ourselves, do I really believe that thought is creative? Do I really believe that there's something, somehow, we call the law of mind? Other people call it different things. Do we truly believe that there's a power that responds to us according to our belief? Now, how do we come to believe that? So we can read a lot about that. We can listen to anecdotal tales. We can have other people say, "Well, yeah, this is what happened to me when I changed my belief, when I changed my thoughts. Here's what happened to me." I remember one time when I was first getting into the ideas of religious science, I was attending the Mile High Church in Denver, and they had a series of like 7 weeks or 7 Sundays where the minister spoke for part of the service, but then people from the congregation got up. I guess in old-time religion we would say they get up to give testimony. They get up to say, "This is how that happened in my life. This is how that unfolded." And there was a man there who said that he was working as a commission salesperson on direct commission. And he went through a month where he only made like $40 or $4 or some very small amount. And he said he realized that was not enough to support his family, pay his mortgage, pay his bills, all those kind of things. And he was studying the principles that we're talking about here. And he said he understood that we're working with a principle. It's done unto you according to your belief. And he said, well, there must be something in my belief system. I don't know exactly what it is, but there must be something here that is limiting the flow of that which is in itself unlimited, right? The energy of God is unlimited, and it takes whatever form it needs, including the form of money flowing into our lives. So he began to work on deliberately expanding his consciousness, expanding his idea, accepting a greater idea of cash flow, of money into his life. And he told himself things like, there's nothing that can limit God, The only thing that can limit my experience is my consciousness. And I now release and let go of every limitation, whatever words he needed to use. And he said the next month he made $8,000. Now this was back in the 80s, probably 87, somewhere around there. So the next month he made $8,000, direct commission sales. And he said, whoa, that's too much money. He was not comfortable. He had exceeded his comfort level, you see. And he said he had to go have a long talk with himself. And he came to realize then that $4,000 a month, that would be something he could live with. That would be enough and more than enough in those days. And he could be comfortable with that. So he began to work on his consciousness to accept $4,000 a month. And he said that ever since he did that, his income averaged out to $4,000 a month. And he knew that the only thing that was keeping him from $8,000 a month was his ability to accept it. So we can listen to stories of other people who say, well, this is what I did, and this is how I changed my thought, and all those. And that's good, and there's a place for it. We can read books. One I recommend, it's a series of books, and it's by Dean Radin, R-A-D-I-N, Dean Radin, Ph.D. I think he's out at the University in Arizona. But he wrote a series of books called The Conscious Universe. And in these series of books, he looked at different experiments that could either indicate or contraindicate that there's something that responds to thought. That the universe itself is conscious and that we think within that conscious universe. And then he laid it all out mathematically and statistically, that probability of these things happening by chance was this, and then they happened at this rate, which kind of indicates that something is going on. Something. And that's all we need to start with. Something is going on. Something is going on. So we can read books. You can read books about how prayer heals. You can read all of these different things. But the bottom line is nothing is going to change until you apply it. This is why Dr. Holmes left us with the idea you have to use it. You have to use it. You have to be willing to go in and find something, find anything that you're willing to deliberately change your thoughts about, change your beliefs about. And to work with that until you see the corresponding change in your experience. Because unless and until you do that, it's all hypothetical. It's all hypothetical. So he tells us there's a great danger. There's a great danger that we'll just talk too much about it and do it too little. And there's a point where we have to get into that step of the wheel of learning where we do things. I was talking to someone last week at one of the doctor's appointments, one of the nurses, and she was talking about training people and how they went about training people. And I told her, I said, there was a time late in my career where I got involved in training and development, and I just kind of backed into it because it was a necessity. I had to develop specific courses that didn't previously exist in order to meet a unique need that we had. And the best source that I found for how to develop training material actually came from the Army. The Marine Corps. It's kind of the same idea. And it was amazing to me because they had to be able to take a high school graduate and then teach that high school graduate how to do something extremely complex, operate a $1 billion piece of equipment, fly an airplane, drive a truck, drive a tank, all these kind of things that they had to do. So they developed kind of a science of how they went about training people, and they took the big tasks and they broke the big tasks down into little tasks. And they taught all of these little tasks, and then they kind of assembled all those tasks together into something bigger, So one of the things that we had to learn when I was in the Army, in the infantry, you had to learn how to assemble and you had to learn how to move, to deploy. From the very first day. The very first day we reported in the Army, they had us learning how to fall in. We were learning how to assemble. They started to teach us how to march. We were learning how to march. Later, they taught us how to get onto the people movers, which we call them cattle cars. It was like a subway car that was pulled behind an 18-wheeler, and you would get in there and they'd have the straps and the poles just like you'd have on a subway car. Later on, they would teach you how to get onto airplanes and all those sorts of things. So they were teaching you all of these little things. But the other thing they did was they would tell you what you needed to know. They would explain the theory. Then they would demonstrate it. They would have somebody who knew how to do it would demonstrate it. But then they made you do it. You had to do it yourself. And while you were doing it, somebody was watching you and somebody was coaching you, and they were giving you the feedback, and you evaluated yourself. How well did I do? Did I do the things that I was told to do? Did I not do the things that I was told to do? What do I need to do better next time? And you kind of get into this wheel of learning. So I want you to think the same way about the things that Dr. Holmes is teaching us. See, he calls us religious scientists, and scientists use kind of words exactly and precisely. And they do that in order to avoid any confused meaning. And if you look at communications today in our society, we don't do that. You know, people use words, and they use very ambiguous words, and then they use other words that they don't really define. And prayer is one of those words. So where I'm going with this is there's this idea then that thought is creative, that we can deliberately, consciously choose to change our thoughts, and we will experience a different result in our lives, a demonstration, and we will experience that because there's this power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. But we're never going to know that until we try that. Yes, read about it. Yes, listen to other people tell you about it. But you have to do it. You have to apply it. Now, this means then that you have to have some idea of what thought is, and you have to have some idea of how to change your thought. And for some people, that's amazing. Some people will tell us, well, I can't control what I thought. I just think what I think because my thoughts are what I am, and I can't stop them, I can't control them, I can't change them. But we can and we must, you know. And this is why we must adopt the disciplines of meditation, of visualization, of affirmation, and of treatment. We have to deliberately find a way to induce the thoughts that create the mental equivalent, the mental picture of that which we wish to experience. You know, we can't go around using the word peace while the images in our heads are hateful. We can't do that. You know, what we're going to get is what we're picturing. We can't go around just saying there aren't sick people. Dr. Holmes tells us you can't just go around saying, well, there's no such thing as sickness, there are no sick people. You know, in one respect, that's true. Right? Spirit has never been sick a day in its life. But that doesn't make people well. We have to learn how to apply what we know. We have to learn how to come to believe it. Not just talk about it, not just read about it, not just sing about it and hold hands about it, but we actually have to come to find a way to bring ourselves to believe it. So this wheel of learning then, we've got the theory. The theory has been given to us that there's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. And we listen to other people do treatment. You listen to me do a treatment. You listen to Lori do a treatment. You read treatments in the back of the Creative Thought magazine. And now comes the time where you're going to have to do it yourself. You're going to have to try it yourself to find out if you can. So I suggest Dean Radin's book. If you know better books, let us know. But find something that goes into this idea that thoughts are creative. Thoughts are creative. Now this then brings us to the idea of prayer, because if thought is creative, what is prayer? Prayer is a movement within thought. Prayer is a definite movement within thought for a definite purpose, right? We're praying. But not all prayer is the same. And this is why, if you read my email last night, this is why I personally have trouble when you start to see these little headlines in the news and it says, study shows prayer is effective. And then the next one will say, study shows prayer is not effective. And all of these kind of things. And there's an assumption there that all prayer is the same. And this is why I say we've got to be careful with the words we use. And this is why we use the word treatment and we don't use the word prayer. Because everybody has an opinion of what prayer is. But when you use the word treatment, somebody says, well, what are you talking about? And at that point, you get an opportunity to explain. You are talking about a specific process that you are using to change your thoughts. A specific process that you are using to set into motion that power that responds to you according to beliefs so that it continues to change your thoughts. And you continue to do this process until you have the demonstration, you have the changed effects in your life. So Dr. Holmes starts off and he says, well, what's the difference between prayer and treatment? People ask that. And he says, well, a prayer can be a treatment if the prayer recognizes the all-knowing, all-powerful, everywhere present God, and it unifies with that. And it unifies with that. God is all there is, and we are one with it. God is everywhere present, right where we are. God is doing its work through us as us. Do we really feel that unification? Do we really feel that oneness? And if you stop and think about many of the prayers that we learned as children, they were not that kind of prayer. They were a begging, beseeching prayer to a faraway God who may or may not give us what we want. So we may say, well, if it's God's will, God will heal us, Well, stop, oh, right there, stop. What is this idea of God that we're talking about? An idea of God that would will us to be sick? Is that our concept of God? Because if that's our concept of God, this is why we have to go back to the beginning. If that's our concept of God, we need to explore that. We need to really work with that until we come to the realization that the divine would never wish us to be sick, could not wish us to be sick. That the sickness that we experience is only an experience. It is not a reality. It is only an appearance, and we're told not to judge by the appearances. The divine does not send sickness to us. So this is one reason why, like when people are sick, you see people go to Facebook and say, send your prayers to so-and-so, I generally don't do that because I don't know how these people pray. I don't know what kind of a God they're praying to. Dr. Cherry Parker was his name. Cherry Parker and Elaine St. John's in the late 50s wrote a book called Prayer Can Change Your Life. Cherry Parker was a divine science minister, as was Ernest Holmes before he founded religious science. And Cherry Parker was teaching psychology, I believe, at a local university. And he got very interested in prayer and healing and started to explore it. And my understanding is from that he decided to enter the ministry. And in his book he came to the realization that yes, prayer can change your life, but not all prayer changes your life in a positive direction. That there are ways of praying that are not only not effective, but maybe effective in the opposite direction. So you don't want to put out this just general thing that says, oh, well, send me your prayers, and assume that everybody knows exactly how to pray the way that you do, and is praying the same way, and is not actually thinking negative thoughts, thinking that God may not heal you, thinking that maybe God sent you that because you really deserve it, or I don't know what they think, So we want to be very careful. So I'm always a bit skeptical when I see these things, that these studies about the effectiveness of prayer, because they do not define what they mean by prayer. They do not define how these people are praying. Nevertheless, if you look at Dean Radin's book, nevertheless, even with all of those differences aside, there's evidence, he claims, there's evidence that prayer does work. He says that, for example, I'll give you one example in his book, that at one time, doctors were trying to understand the effectiveness of the 81 milligram aspirin for people who have had a heart attack, the daily regimen of taking 81 milligram aspirin a day. So they had this study going, and the doctors were given 81 milligram aspirin to some patients and placebos to other patients, and nothing to another group of patients. And during the course of the test, they came to the understanding that the aspirin was so effective that they needed to stop the study and go ahead and start giving aspirin to everybody that had a heart attack. Because to not do so, to withhold the aspirin, based on the information they had, they felt that to withhold the aspirin would be malpractice. And according to Dean Radin, the evidence that prayer, and again, he didn't go into what prayer is, but according to his statistical analysis of the studies that dealt with prayer, he says prayer is 5 times more effective than the 81 milligram aspirin. Yet medical science cannot tell you, well, you really need to find somebody to go pray for you, but find somebody that knows how to pray correctly. So where we're starting is we're starting with this idea then that thought is creative, but it's deliberate thought, it's conscious thought, and we're thinking all the time, and we're not always thinking deliberately, we're not always mindful, we're not always thinking consciously. And Dr. Holmes in his book tells us that trained thought is more powerful than untrained thought. So this is number one. We get up in the morning and our mind is all over the place. The clock radio goes off. The news starts bombarding us with these stories. The coffee starts percolating. The traffic report comes on TV, and we are not deliberately doing anything. Right? We are just immersed in the experience, and we have to take time. We have to take time to control our thoughts. During the day, we have to take time to become aware of what we're thinking and control our thoughts. Second thing we need is we need a specific process to help us to bring our thoughts into a certain line of thinking and a certain line of belief, and that is what he calls the process of treatment. And he's very clear to separate it from the process of prayer, because we're not talking about begging, beseeching, or pleading. We are talking about directing a power. Now, I want to give you something here that I think might be helpful. Sometimes people get very superstitious when it comes to this treatment, and they say, am I commanding God to do something? Am I trying to order God around as if God was a butler or a concierge? And I'm saying, oh God, bring me, as Janis Joplin, right? Bring me a Mercedes Benz. We're not doing that at all. And you want to get that superstition out of your mind. So what you want to do, perhaps, is you want to think of what you're doing is you are learning how to cooperate with a law that already exists, that you did not create, and you can't turn off. Just like gravity, you can't stop gravity. Okay? So if you go outside and you build a water wheel by your mill pond and get it to get the gravity to push the water down the hill to turn your water wheel to grind your corn, you're not superstitious about that. Excuse me. You're just cooperating with the way things are. So if you want to think about what are you commanding, or what are you directing, or what are you telling to do, you are telling your own subconscious mind. You're telling your own subconscious mind to change what it believes. That's what you're doing. That's what you're doing. So if there's any idea in here that you're trying to command God and tell God what to do, you need to get over that. You're not telling God to do anything. You're telling yourself to accept the goodness that is already there. That is what you are doing. So when you're going into this process of treatment, yes, you start out by reminding yourself what God is, because that's what you're accepting. And then you remind yourself that you are one with that and you are part of that. And because you are part of that, the power that responds to thought responds to your thought. And then at step number 3, what you are doing is consciously telling yourself what your new beliefs are. That's what you're doing. And how often do you do this? You do this every day until a demonstration is made. Every day until a demonstration is made. And every day what you will find is when you go in to do your treatment will change slightly, because your consciousness is expanding, it is evolving, it is changing, and different aspects of whatever it is within you that needed to change come up, and your treatment kind of directs towards that. In our first year class, we used to have people pair up into prayer buddies, and 2 people would exchange, well, I'd like you to treat for this for me for 30 days. Whatever it happened to be, a new job, a new car, a new house, whatever, it doesn't matter. And the prayer buddy would do the treatment for that. Each would do treatment for the other for 30 days. And very often people would come in before the 30 days were up and say, it's amazing, because every day a different idea comes to me, a different way of treating on this subject comes up for me. And then eventually they reach a point where they can't do anymore. They just sit down and do the treatment and say, well, but the treatment's already done. See? And that's actually the 5th step of treatment. That's the release. There's nothing more to do. It's already done. The law has it. So because our thought is creative, human beings have learned over the centuries of this idea of prayer, but this idea of prayer is not always effective. It is not always efficient. And what has happened is we have now come to an evolution in that thought of something that we're calling treatment, which is effective prayer, which is affirmative prayer, which is taking the superstition out of this idea, which is taking the idea that somehow God wants me to be sick or poor or hungry, and dismissing it and saying that there's nothing in the divine mind that wants me to be sick, poor, or hungry. If I am experiencing that, there's a blockage within my own consciousness, or within race consciousness, within human consciousness. And I now very deliberately dissolve that. I now very deliberately dissolve that, and I replace that blockage with the truth, the perfect health, perfect prosperity, perfect love, whatever it happens to be, is mine right now. And then this brings us to faith, because, sometimes we do our prayer, we do our treatment, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work, and we say, well, what is the difference? What is the difference? How come sometimes it works, sometimes? Well, we don't know. We're just beginning to learn these things, I think, as far as human consciousness goes, Emmett Fox said that we're not far removed from the cave. We understand the mind of the caveman because we're not that far removed. But what seems to be kind of the rheostat on the wall, you know, the knob on the wall that you turn and it makes the lights go up brighter and dimmer. If you could think of something that kind of controls the effectiveness of our treatment, it would seem to be this thing called faith. And what is faith but a knowing, as I said at the beginning? Faith is a knowing so certain that something is done that any idea to the opposite cannot enter your mind. You and I have perfect faith in gravity. Unless we are under the influence of some kind of a substance that we were introduced to in the 60s, we usually don't wake up in the morning wondering if we're going to float off to bed and get stuck to the ceiling. We don't go step outside the door and wonder if when we push off with our foot, if we're going to fly up in the air. We don't start rolling our car down the hill, backing down a hill and saying, well, there's no need for me to put my foot on the brake because gravity's not going to work today. None of that. It just doesn't occur to us that gravity isn't going to work today. Right? We have absolute faith in gravity. It's not a superstitious faith. It's not a voodoo faith. We don't have to light candles in order to feel better about it. We know beyond a shadow of a doubt that gravity works. We know that when we flip the light switch that the lights are going to come on as long as, you know, the circuits are all working the way they're supposed to. We don't have to coerce the electricity to work. We don't have to coerce the gravity to work. And we don't have to coerce the law of mind to work. See, this is Dr. Holmes tells us, we got to get out of this mode of thinking, well, I'm going to scrunch up my eyes and I'm going to make it happen. No. It is done unto you according to your belief. It is done unto you. So this idea of faith is a knowing so certain that the opposite cannot enter our mind. And the good news is that faith can be developed. And again, it is the same process that I was talking about earlier. Who can you talk to? Who can you listen to? What can you read that helps you come to a certainty, a knowing that not only is thought creative, is thought directive, that there's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief, but that I can use it, you see. And Dr. Holmes tells us this, if it exists and you can't use it, it's of no use to you, right? You can't use it. It's no good to you. You have to learn how to use it. So you have to get involved. You have to start to do this. You have to start to use this. So the process then is again, you know, what is the theory? The theory is that this thing that we call faith is really a certainty, a knowing, a belief, and that can be developed. And we develop it by listening to other people who have developed faith. We develop it by reading books, by listening to Sunday talks, by all those things. But ultimately, we have to do it. We have to enter that phase of the wheel of learning where we have to do it. So what is it that you are willing to look at in your life? What is it that you are willing to look at and say, I'm willing to change my belief about that particular thing? And you choose. It doesn't matter to me. I don't even want to know what it is, you know. But are you willing to take one thing? Two things maybe. Don't take 1,000 at once, you know. Take something. And when you're starting, you want to take something that you know, you learned in business, stretch objectives, right? If the objective is so far out there, your ability to believe in it is and your ability to develop the belief in it is kind of limited at the beginning, right? You know, so do you believe you can walk on water? Well, it should be possible, right? If it's done unto us according to our belief, and I really believe it, then I should be able to do that. But most of us would say, you know, Peter did good just sinking up to his knees. I don't know about that. Am I willing to take the time? How much time would it take me to develop the consciousness of walking on water? Now, that doesn't mean it can't be done, but it means that it's beyond our current ability to believe. So you want to find something that's you know, a stretch. It's a little bit more than what you currently believe, but it's still within the realm of possibility for you. What is it that you want? better health, better fitness, better income, better relationships, better job. What is it that you want? What is it that you want more of? It doesn't always have to be a problem to be solved. What is it that you want more of? And are you willing to take a deliberate process that we call treatment and sit down once a day, whether it be morning or evening or afternoon, I don't care. You're willing to sit down once a day and deliberately induce the thoughts that are the mental equivalent of that which you wish to experience. See, this is the whole foundation of, as he says, this is the whole foundation of spiritual mind treatment. Spiritual mind treatment works because there's a power that responds to us according to our belief, and we can change what we believe through the process of treatment. And he further goes on to tell us that it doesn't matter what process we use. If we change that belief, the law is going to respond anyway. So this is why prayers of all peoples have produced answers. It's not like we have a lock on the only process that works, but we have one that's repeatable. It's scientific in that it's repeatable. Right? You can do it over and over. You can teach it to somebody else, rather than just saying to somebody, "Well, why don't you go pray about that?" Which you hear. You hear a lot. Let's pray about that. But let's do it in a deliberate fashion. Let's do it in a manner that gives us the feedback that we need. Let's try different techniques. A 5-step process of treatment, a 7-step process of treatment. Let's try visualization, which is treating with pictures. Let's try affirmations, which shake loose the old underlying disbelief and gets them up where we can get them out of our system. Let's try meditation, where we can learn how to observe our thoughts and learn that we can control our thoughts and learn that we don't have to believe every thought that comes through our head. Okay? So where I wanted to go today, what I wanted to get to today was just something very practical, something very tangible, something that we can all put our minds around, so to speak, and we can do. Because unless and until we do it, it's of no use to us. Unless and until we do it, it may or may not be so. So we have to find out for ourselves. We have to take the responsibility to find out for ourselves. So keep the premise in mind, right? Thought is creative because thought directs a power that knows what to do. The power doesn't judge. The power doesn't change what we do. If we put a tomato seed in the ground, the power produces a tomato plant. It's just that simple. We put thoughts of health into our consciousness, and health must manifest in our experience. And we want to think about good health. We don't want to think about not being sick, because that's thinking of sickness. We want to think of health. We want to learn that there's a specific way to do that, to change those thoughts, that this process called treatment sets into motion that law that further produces whatever change or changes are necessary in our consciousness. And we want to remember that what we are doing is deliberately acquiring faith. That's what we're doing. We're deliberately acquiring faith. It is done unto us according to our belief. By your faith it is done unto you. As you think and believe in your heart, so it is. So let's make this the year of practical application. Let's make this the year of putting what we know to the test. Right? As Emerson said, don't take anybody's word for what's good or bad. Try it for yourself. I think it's either in the Gospel of John or one of the epistles. It says, you have to try the gods for yourself to see if they are false gods. You have to get in there. You have to, I always tell people, you can't dig a hole from the outside. You got to get your shovel and get down in there, and you got to start throwing dirt out. You have to get in and you have to start using this. Otherwise, it's just a feel good. Holmes called it a salutary experience. That's okay in as far as it goes, but we want more than that. We want actual results. We want to learn how to use this. And I'll just leave you with this idea of the importance of it. The lives that we are leading here on earth right now are temporary. We know that. Someday you and I will leave our physical bodies, or leave these physical bodies behind and move on to new ones. But what we will have with us when we leave is our consciousness. So it's very important for us now to be learning what consciousness is and how to work with our consciousness and how to develop our consciousness and how to control our consciousness, because everything else that we have we're going to leave behind. So we need to groom that which matters, that which lasts, that which we're going to take with us. You are the very love of God. The divine has created you in its image and likeness, which means that your thought is creative. And there's nothing you can do to change that. But you can learn how to control it. You can learn how to direct it. You can learn how to work with it. And in so doing, you ultimately learn more about yourself and you learn more about God. But for right now, let's focus on the practical. What are you going to do with this? So I invite you to think about this today. Think about something that you would like to see a change in your life and put it to use. And if you need help doing that, join us on the mastermind call, which is not tomorrow night, but it is a week from tomorrow night at 7 p.m. on the Conference Bridge. And we will go through the process of learning how to treat in order to produce these changes in your life. Have a blessed week. Thank you for your love and your prayers. And so it is.